come up with catchy slogans for certain destinations, and Dodge City, Kansas is no exception. Playing on its popularity as a great Old West town, they've flipped the invitation that became a household phrase on TV's Gunsmoke. Instead of "get out of Dodge," they want you to get into Dodge. While there's more to today's Dodge City than ghosts of the Old West, it would be fair to say that modern Dodge lives in the shadows of the recreated town that continually celebrates the frontier. Once a boom town, today's population is about 27,000. Dodge City is about 150 miles from Wichita, making it off the beaten path today, even though it was virtually on the Santa Fe Trail and in the thick of things in the 1870s. Wyatt Earp Boulevard is one of the main streets, and the famous lawman has both a statue and a plaque on what is known as a Trail of Fame. In addition to tourism, the meatpacking industry, fittingly, is also a major part of the economy. National Beef and Cargill are major employers. But it is inside Boot Hill Museum where the old Dodge City really comes to life. You can hear the sound of a honky-tonk piano inside the Long Branch Saloon, which is just one of the attractions in the Boot Hill Museum. There's a boardwalk along the replica town that was built a short distance from where the actual Dodge City stood in the 1870s, during the heyday of the cattle trade. And there are plenty of people around who know the history, the folklore, and the fiction that has long been associated with what once was a real Wild West town. While the characters might look like they're out of the history books, people like Brent Harris let visitors know he's not Wyatt Earp. But he's happy to tell tourists about Dodge City and how it became a boomtown.
There were hundreds of thousands of feral longhorn cattle in southern Texas. The country needed meat, high demand for meat. In Texas, those cattle were worth $4 a head. If they could get them to Dodge City, which in turn would be placed on the train to be shipped to the processing plants, they could sell the cattle for $40 a head. Pretty good incentive.
One of the Dodge founders was Robert Wright, who went to Texas soliciting cattle business.
In 1874, he led what I like to think of as the first Dodge City Area Chamber of Commerce delegation to Texas, and convinced the Texas cattlemen to start driving their cattle here. So in 1875, the cattle drive era began.
All the money that came with it attracted unsavory characters who contributed to the town's bawdy reputation. Both Wyatt Earp and Bat Masterson were lawmen in Dodge City in this era, as the convergence of guns, cowboys, saloons, and brothels created a dangerous town.
And then, especially Bat, became one of the quintessential Western law enforcement agents. A couple of terms as Ford County Sheriff right here in Dodge City. Dodge City in many ways exists because of Bat Masterson helping keep it together at a time where that was one of the most difficult job descriptions in the world.
The epitome of the Old West, Wyatt Earp. And people often ask me questions about Mr. Earp, and I just simply will not get into an argument about him. I think he was one of the grandest gentlemen that ever lived. There are Wyatt Earp lovers and Wyatt Earp haters. Here in Dodge City, he was it. Many said he was a fearless man.
Dodge City's second wave of notoriety came about with the television series Gunsmoke. There are those history purists who think of Gunsmoke as strictly fiction. But some of the show's writers who visited Dodge said that's not quite true.
People say, well, those were fictitious characters. They had nothing to do with Dodge City's history. They said, you can set them straight. When we developed those storylines, we went to a great deal of trouble to base those particular characters, Miss Kitty, Doc, Matt, Festus over actual people that lived here in Dodge City. The stories, many of the stories were based on some of the actual things that happened here.
The Long Branch Saloon, owned by Miss Kitty in Gunsmoke, was both real and a central part of the TV show. The most famous real owner, Chalkley Beeson, has his portrait on the wall. Dora Hand is also a legendary Dodge City figure.
Dora Hand was a real person in Dodge City's history, very colorful woman, which we believe the role of Miss Kitty was based on. And she was a singer, a trained singer, was in one of our saloons. And I've always found our history just to be so exciting.
Another popular picture at the Long Branch features the Gunsmoke cast. Anthony Lyons remembers meeting Milburn Stone, who played Doc Adams, when Stone visited his hometown of Burton, Kansas, where Lyons grew up.
And Mr. Stone came home. And he was only there for 2 or 3 days. He spoke at the school. And then there was one day when they set up a table for him in the post office, because in those days, everybody went to the post office to get their mail. And that way he could visit with his friends and his relatives while he was there.
The Long Branch also boasts the longest-running variety show anywhere. It started in 1958, and drawing on Gunsmoke always features a Miss Kitty. Connie Pennick once played that role.
Those were in the, so I say the Gunsmoke years, when it was on television and that sort of thing. And so it was just something that I thought I could do and I wanted to do. I auditioned for it, and yes, they hired me, and I was there for 10 years.
Connie was part of a civic group that helped restore the Santa Fe Depot. The restored depot had once been one of the famous Harvey House hotels, served by the Harvey Girls, and made famous by a 1940s movie starring Judy Garland. In recent years, the town saved the depot, which is the home of a theater company and a banquet hall. It is also still used as a train station for Amtrak service. Visitors can also see other facets of Dodge at the Boot Hill Museum. The jail exhibit describes some of the, quote, singers and dancers under the heading Prostitution in Dodge. It also notes that the newspapers of the day referred to them as soiled doves. And the People of the Plains exhibit features Native Americans, who the settlers at times lived with and, of course, fought against. This is Setanta, one of the most active raiders of the Kiowa tribe. And the Long Branch wasn't the only saloon. This one doubled as a gambling house, complete with a faro table, the game Wyatt Earp was known to deal. Earp and Bat Masterson were part of a so-called peace commission, which put pressure on owner Luke Short, who left town as a result. And the Boot Hill Museum lives up to its name. While dozens of towns had a Boot Hill Cemetery, Dodge City had the distinction of being first. One of the most famous graves is of the unknown cowboy, and there's a marker for 5 buffalo hunters who froze to death on the plains. The last person to be buried there was Alice Chambers, one of the women who came to be known as a soiled dove. Appropriately, the marker for Boot Hill contains some verse, ending, "We tamed the West when this our land was young, and sank into our graves unknown, unsung."